So more education now, joined by education expert Professor Metcalfe to analyze some of the system glitches and as the country awaits the matric results and the reopening of schools. Prof, good to have you and thank you very much for coming on this evening. The examination assess or quality assurer says that there is an upward trend in the number of subjects for which raw marks were accepted over the last 3 years, whether be it at the DHET or the Department of Higher Education, whether be it in IEB, whether be it in DBE, whether be it in Sakai. Is this a sign of a maturing system or is it a sign of a system that is fairly making it, considering some of the concerns that have been raised by Umalusi?
Thank you, Tobo. I think that we need to make sure we understand what it is that Umalusi is saying. So what happens is that all of the examining bodies that you've mentioned do the work of marking the examination, and then they take those raw scores, and Umalusi has the job of comparing and standardizing the results. And the purpose of that is so that any learner who gets a certificate, for example, the DBE's National Senior Certificate, can be certain that when he applies or she applies to a university or goes to an employer, that the results of 1 year are comparable to any other year. Now, when Umalusi says that the raw scores, there's more that they've accepted as being correct in terms of a standardization process. What it means, I think, just at a simple scientific level, is that the marking and the standard of the examinations for this year is consistent with previous years and hasn't required adjustments up and down. Now, there's nothing wrong with adjustments. It's part of the standardization process. But what it tells us is that in terms of all the examining bodies, their raw scores did not need to be adjusted in any way to align with standards of previous years. So it's good.
Yeah. Are you concerned at all at the concerns that have been raised, which are systematic, I suppose, in their nature? It's printing issues. It's no mistakes here and the poor quality, I suppose, of the print. He's also talking about concerns around the translation from English to Afrikaans. But then, of course, there is that situation of the group copying, which is probably something that has to do with the invigilation that is taking place.
I think it's good that we have a credible body that can quality assure, because the public needs to have confidence that the results that come out have been quality assured, and the rigor with which Umalusi approaches this is something that should give us confidence. So copying, if it was picked up by Umalusi, if it was picked up by the DBE, it's good that it was picked up. Any matter that would affect the credibility of the exams, we need a strong Umalusi, and we need examining bodies that have integrity and rigor.
We spoke about this, myself and maybe many other colleagues during the COVID-19 pandemic, that there was, of course, going to be a little bit of leniency in how the markers are going to be looking at grade 10 and grade 11s. It shows, according to Stellenbosch's released report, that there was a significant drop in a number of pupils repeating grades 10 and grade 11. It dropped dramatically after those tests were relaxed to compensate for the learning losses. Is that telling us something? Is that data telling us something around our assessments?
You know, I'm really excited by the research that RECEP has done, and I think it's good that the media provides opportunities for the public to understand it. So let's first of all understand what happened in terms of COVID. This year's matrics, this year's grade 12s, were in grade 10. No, I must check that. But we need to just think back to where they were when COVID hit. If they were in grade 10, which I think isn't quite correct, they would have missed, and many of the grades missed schooling, all of the time from when we were all hit with the knowledge of COVID until the schools went back in August. So they would have missed from about March to about August. Now, one of the principles that the DBE has adopted, which is a profoundly important education principle, even though it looks like common sense, you can only assess what's been taught. So if children were not at school and they were not receiving instruction, you can't test them on the whole curriculum. That's the first thing. The second thing is to understand the purpose of assessment. And the purpose of assessment broadly, there's two purposes. One is to see how learners are doing relative to other learners in the system, which is where you need a standardized or a external assessment such as the NEC. But the most valuable form of assessment is what teachers can learn about how they need to respond to learners. This is called a formative assessment. The DBE is strongly pushing, and correctly so, that assessment should be used to help teachers understand where learners are and teach them better. That's the first question. Now, the way that the media has presented the Stellenbosch research is they're saying things were more lenient. I'm not sure that we can say that they were more lenient. The first thing is they changed the balance between the percentage of the final mark that comes from school-based assessment relative to the formal exam.
Yeah.
Now, that, I think, is a very necessary thing. Why should we put the whole of a child's future into one or two exams written at the end of the year?
Yeah.
The way that the child performs throughout the year is also an important indicator of progress. What you therefore need is to make sure that that's standardized across schools, and that what exists. So changing the assessment from to a greater emphasis on school-based assessment, I think, is a good thing, as long as you have standardization measures to make sure that all children are having an equal chance. The next thing, that the way that the media is presenting it, is that it's been said that the standards were lowered. If they were lowered, it was marginal. So, for example, the pass mark for the home language was shifted under COVID from 45 to 40. It's marginal. So I think that those were appropriate adjustments given COVID. But the most important thing, which needs the biggest debate in the public, is the value of repetition. Now, when a learner does not meet the standard in order to be promoted, there's an assumption that they're going to do better by repeating. But there's a lot of educationists who argue that the social consequences of having to repeat with learners that are younger than you, and the humiliation of that, actually becomes a constraint on learning. And what the DBE's results are showing, when we get the results on Thursday, one of the things I'll be looking for is how did the progressed learners do. Now, these are learners who did not meet the promotion requirements from grade 11, but were allowed to proceed to grade 12. And what we've seen year after year is that many of those learners do well, or pass at least in matric, some of them with bachelor passes. So the Reset Stellenbosch paper raises the critical question of the value of repetition. This is a huge issue for individuals and for the system.
How about then the whole debate about how we should approach poor performance in particular subjects, for example, maths, and where certain provinces would have discouraged students from taking natural maths and going for maths lit, or maybe even dropping maths altogether, showing in the numbers of the matriculants who actually wrote the maths paper.
Well, the conclusion of the Reset paper, the Stellenbosch paper, I absolutely agree with. I have, over many years, I studied this, and I stopped studying it because the pattern was so clear. I'll tell you the pattern that I saw, is that the provinces with the lowest number of maths entrants were the provinces with the highest pass rates. And those two provinces, when I was studying it, was Western Cape and Gauteng. And the way I interpret that is that Western Cape, Gauteng, because of the greater capacity they have, are giving correct advice to matriculants to say, you are not doing well at maths. It may be better for you to succeed in Maths Lit and pass the NSC than to persist with maths, pure maths, academic maths, and risk failing. That's precisely the conclusion that the Stellenbosch paper comes to. What they show is that the number of learners who would pass maths with a pass at a level that would get them into the high status maths and science fields is not sufficient to justify the risk of failing. And I think that this is an important time for us to reflect on the value of Maths Lit. You know, the public has a very negative view of maths literacy, but what we need to recognize is that before the curriculum required that learners do either maths or Maths Lit, many learners didn't do maths at all from grade 10. And what we had in the old system before CAPS and the new system is that many learners would pass at higher grade or lower grade. What we have now is a much more maths literate population, but instead of having higher grade and lower grade, we have some doing academic maths, which is required for some courses in university, but not all, and all of the rest of the learners doing maths literacy, which I will say to you, probably I'll speak for myself and not for you, for me to pass a maths lit paper would require considerable more maths than I actually remember. It's not easy. It's applied maths. So we shouldn't have such a negative view of it. You can go to university with Maths Lit, and let's not encourage learners to do something for which they are ill-prepared, badly supported, and risk failing.
We appreciate your intervention tonight. Prof, education expert there, Professor Mary Metcalfe, giving us some analysis there, following Umalusi, giving the results for 2023 a thumbs up. They'll be released a little bit later on in the week, and of course, we'll bring you that update.